Everybody. Good morning, all the participants. Thank you very much for joining us in today's webinar on hybrid renewable power plants opportunities and challenges. We are hosting this webinar live from SAARC Energy Center. I am Bilal Hussain, and I'm working here as a research fellow power, and I shall be moderating today's webinar. As you all know, the aim of the webinar is to dig out the myths and realities linked to the hybrid renewable energy power plants and how South Asia could move forward in this respect on the policy landscape, especially. So we are certainly looking forward to some exciting learnings today, starting with our first agenda item of the webinar. Let me inform all that we have the pleasure of the company of Director of SAARC Energy Center, Mr. Naeem Malik. Thank you very much, sir, for taking time out of your busy schedule to attend the event. I would like to request you, sir, to deliver a welcome speech.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Dear friends, participants, and presenters of the webinar, Assalamu alaikum and very good morning. I am Naeem Malik, Director SAARC Energy Center, and I welcome you all to this webinar on hybrid renewable plants, opportunities and challenges. It's a great honor for me to speak to you on this occasion and over a topic that is highly relevant to ongoing efforts to promote renewable energy in the region. Dear participants, first of all, let me briefly speak about SAARC Energy Center and its responsibilities. SAARC Energy Center is a regional center of SAARC Secretariat and was established in 2006 to promote development of energy resources, enhance energy trade in the region, develop frameworks for renewable energy resource exploitation, and to promote energy efficiency and energy conservation in the 8 member states. We do that by commissioning various research studies, organizing workshops and webinars, holding dialogues and helping find the solutions of the regional energy related challenges of the South Asian member states. The center is expected to translate the energy vision of SAARC leadership into reality. Therefore, a governing board equally represented by the energy professionals from all 8 member states was constituted to guide and supervise the center. The day-to-day functional control of the center lies with the SAARC Secretariat. Pakistan, being the host country, shares the major portion of financial burden. During the last 10 years, around a decade, the center has emerged as a vibrant and effective SAARC institute, which has played its role in all regional level energy initiatives. To date, the center has carried out almost 150 interventions. The reports of all these interventions are available on our website. Dear participants, one has seen an immense reduction in prices of electricity from renewable energy resources over the last 2 decades. Today, in addition to being green, these technologies are also winning in price competition with conventional fossil generation technologies. However, the rising share of variable renewables, it is posing serious integration challenges due to their inherent nature of being intermittent and uncertain. Combining multiple renewable technologies in one generation facility, also known as hybridization, gives an interesting area to explore for reducing such challenges posed by a single technology. Oftentimes, the complementarity of wind and solar resource in a particular location helps in lowering the intermittency and uncertainty of such generation facility. Hybrid renewable power plants can also add up the resource utilization rates of individual renewable energy technologies, thus making it more economical. Nevertheless, there are several challenges to hybridization as well. Generally, there is rare, there is a rare and limited availability of such regions which have excellent potential of multiple renewable resources. Hybridization also adds a certain degree of design complexity arising due to joint presence of more than one renewable energy technology. Additionally, being new in practice, some major concerns of grid integration of such power plant remain underexplored, particularly in respect of power quality, forecasting, and dispatch operation. Over the time, several SAARC member states, particularly Pakistan and India, have started getting the demand from renewable plant owners to utilize the untapped potential of multiple renewable energy resources within their plant area. India has already taken lead and is developing a couple of pilot projects along with a special policy on wind solar hybrid power plants introduced in May 2018. However, lack of facilitating policies and non-existent past practices are still the major challenges for rest of the SAARC member states. This webinar is essentially a step towards enhancing the capacity of relevant stakeholders of all member states on this important topic of hybrid renewable energy power plants. Gentlemen, in this webinar, we have the honor of having distinguished South Asian experts. I am delighted to have Mr. Ranishka uh, Jasinga from ADP, Mr. Garjo from Siemens Middle East, Mr. Javed Siddiqui from Sapphire Wind Pakistan, Mr. Irfan Yusuf from AEDP Pakistan, and Mr. Vibash from PwC India. I am honored to acknowledge the great cooperation and support extended by all of you for this webinar, and I welcome you all. This depicts resolve and commitment to the cause of energy and environment. In the end, I once again thank you all for being with us today and joining us in this webinar, and I wish you all a very comfortable learning and knowledge sharing in this event. I thank you all and wish you best of luck. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for describing the role of SAARC Energy Center in this landscape of energy dialogue in South Asia. Now, quickly, participants, we would move on to the webinar next agenda items. Dear participants, hybrid renewable power plants are definitely not a new idea. However, this debate is fast catching importance across South Asia. Therefore, we consider that the time is right to listen to the field people about the actual progress on this front and what can be done in this regard in the future. Just to simplify the proceedings of this webinar, we have actually divided the webinar into two sessions. So the first session would be particularly focusing on the aspects relating to the economics of hybrid renewable power plants, their operational and design challenges, and contemporary solutions available worldwide on the technology side. In the second session, we will shift our focus to more broader system level benefits of hybrid power plants and learn about the best incentives the government would consider to promote such hybrid concepts. Dear participants, let's quickly move on to our first presenter with a quick side note that you have the opportunity to ask questions to presenters by typing your questions in the GoToWebinar application window. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentations. We will collect them and address them during the question answer sessions at the end of each session. Um, quickly to Mr. Ranishka from Asian Development Bank, who will be speaking on the Sri Lankan experience with hybrid renewable-based microgrids in islands. Mr. Ranishka is the Senior Project Officer, Energy at Asian Development Bank. He is an electrical engineer with masters from University of Technology, Sydney, and a great amount of experience on several ADB programs in South Asian region. Over to you, sir, Mr. Ranishka. You can now proceed with your presentation. I have just transferred the screen controls and audio to you.
Thank you very much. Hope you can hear me now.
Yes, sir, we can hear you clearly.
Okay. Thank you very much for the opportunity and also for the introduction. Good morning to everybody, or good afternoon, depending on wherever you are. For me, it's about 2:15 in the afternoon. I'll quickly go into the presentation, which is a case study, something which we have implemented in Sri Lanka through a ADB grant. Let me highlight the design of the project and why it was required, and also towards the end the outcome and the performance of the project. So this can actually help us how we can think of these renewable energy hybrid mini grids. The location, if all of you know where the Sri Lanka is, and then towards the northern part of the Sri Lanka, we have few islands which are not connected to the mainland. Since these are distant, the national grid also is distant. So we don't have the grid connected electricity in most of these islands. And Eluvatev is one of those islands. This is the demographics of this island, very small, roughly about 3 kilometers long and about 700 meters wide. Only about 170 houses with 5 government buildings. Approximate population is about 800. And this is the island, beautiful island in the northern peninsula. As you approach, this is what you see in the island. Now the details before this project. It was powered by 2 diesel generators of 100 kilowatt and 25 kilowatt, and very unreliable power supply. And the power is supplied only during the peak hours. And the cost, of course, no need to mention about the cost of the generation through a diesel generator. And out of the 170 houses, only 120 were connected. And this is the state of the this was the state of these 2 diesel generators that they had in the island. Now this was the details of the system. Peak demand of 26 kilowatt, but still they were not able to give a reliable uninterrupted power supply. Now this is the average load of the island. It varies due to many reasons. We really can't find a pattern here, but this is the average load throughout the history. And the demand. If you look at, this is very common to our part of the world. We have a night peak and also a morning peak because of the lighting and the other appliances. And there's a little bit of a daily peak around 12. If you really look at this island, it's because of the people are coming back to home for having the meals. The change, what we thought is because of the cost, because of the reliability, and how we are going to meet the future demand. And And the options we can think of having a submarine cable, but due to the cost, again, it was not possible. But on the other hand, the availability of renewable energy sources, wind and solar, and then we had to look for the O&M cost, which was the main component during the history. Now, this is what was proposed, very basic diagram of what we had identified. Let me go into details. This is the wind resource available, and it was supposed to be average, fairly good wind resources because of the location, and it has a monsoon period which can generate wind power. And you could see from May to September, this is the monsoon season, so you get fairly high wind patterns. And about the solar, based on the NREL database, the daily radiation value is good enough. So the design had included a renewable energy mini grid with solar and wind. And the analysis was based on HUMA software, and to determine what are the renewable energy resources and whether they are adequate enough, and also to optimize the components and the sizes of the different technologies, and also to calculate the investment cost as well as the O&M cost. And then finally, we actually conducted the economic sensitivity analysis and then realized, okay, we can go ahead based on the comparison. And the simulations we used the demand and then the seasonal profile. We inputted these data to the HOMA, and then the wind data available based on the wind mast we had installed, and also the approximate power curve of the identified wind turbine. And the solar energy radiation, again, the variation over the year, and also the diesel generators as a backup source. These are the input data. And based on the simulation, the results, the evaluation of alternatives, base case scenario is the two old generator sets, which is on this graph towards the left side, and then the new generator without any renewables, the second case, or renewables penetration of 17% without batteries, and the optimum scenario, which is roughly about 75% renewable, and another scenario which is 100% renewable without the diesel. And if you look at the comparison, and you could see the cost, levelized cost of energy, as well as the net present cost of the investment. It has very identical patterns based on the home optimum scenario, which is 75% renewable with storage, gives the best alternative. So ideally, or in all practical sense, we went ahead with this scenario. And these were the outputs or the results based on that scenario. Roughly about in this scenario, roughly about 94% is from the wind and the solar, and from the battery. But it depends on I'll come to the results at the end. And the project was initiated somewhere in 2014. The contracts were awarded in 2015, and within just a little more than 1 year, the project was commissioned, and it was commissioned in June 2016. And the installed capacity is the diesel generator 30 kilowatts, wind turbines 21, 6 turbines, 3.5 kilowatt each, and then the PV panels 46 kilowatt peak, and also the battery of 42 kilowatt at 110 kilowatt hours. The peak power capacity of 60 kilowatt, if you remember, the demand was in the range of 20s. Generation and distribution voltage is 230, 400. And this is a basic schematic diagram of the system, which has the wind and the PV connected through the inverters, and the battery bank, and also the generator connected to the AC bus in case of requirement. Battery storage system connected to the single phase grid to the bidirectional grid forming inverter through the inverter, and also works as the master cluster. And for the other two phases, also formed as the similar clusters, and it works on the master and slave principle. Battery management system is within the batteries, and which can communicate with the inverter. And this is just a diagram of the battery storage system. And these are the parameters of the battery storage system. I will not go through the details, but I can share the presentation based on the requirements. And this is just a photo of the battery system. And the inverter, which is a grid forming inverter, which efficiently charge and discharge, and also manage the entire service of the life. And also inverter works as the load management, which can connect and disconnect loads if required. And it has the overload capability and the system management based on the energy sources availability and the control of the system. And it can supply and control the frequency. Of course, it's a grid forming inverter, and also supply and control the voltage. And of course, it can supply the active as well as reactive power. And this is just a photo of the inverter system and the PV panels. This is just the information of the PV panels, and just a photo of the system installed in the roof of the control building as well as in the car park. Wind generation system. It has 6 turbines, and it has a dump load based on the generation, based on the controls from the inverter, which has a dump load to dissipate the extra power generated, and the information of the brand and the other information. This is what was installed. Very install friendly type of wind generator. Screw type of foundation was used, and it was easy to install, and given the limitations you have in these islands, so this was being used. And it controls, it has definitely has 2 control system. Your control, that's for the direction, and also the pitch control based on the speed of the wind, and also to control and protect the high winds. And the diesel generator, the new one, which has the electronic governor and the automatic voltage regulator. And this is the information about the diesel generator. And under the normal circumstances, the available generation, if the available generation, or if the demand is higher than the available generation, the batteries can supply the balance requirement. Or else the inverter can send a signal to the generator to start and supply the demand. And if the battery charging is low and there's no renewable energy generation to charge the batteries, then again the inverter automatically starts the diesel generator to charge the batteries. This generally happens during the early hours in the morning around 4 5 when the batteries are drained. Usually you see this happens. This is a system simulation for a day with very moderate PV and wind. You could see this is a simulation, not actual data. You could see during the daily from 6 to about 7 p.m. you can meet the demand from solar and from the wind and from the battery. And after about 6 or 7 p.m. And it drains the battery, but early in the morning you could actually have a diesel generator functioning. The challenges we had mainly about the load profile, which is common to these islands, the load profile which I presented earlier, which has the morning peak as well as the evening peak. And then because of that, the solar or the wind can easily ride through during the off peak, especially during the night. The wind can ride through. And also during the day, since there's not much of demand, you could see even the solar can ride through. So the excess energy it was a challenge, how to utilize it and how to use it, or whether we require diesel generator or not was a challenge. But the outcome was a combination of these options. And about the logistics, if you look at these small islands, many of them in that part, only small boats can travel, and the conditions are hot and humid, and not enough manpower, not enough trained or skilled labor, and this was the first of its kind in the country. The details, the equipment was funded by ADB grant, which was roughly about 400,000 US dollars. The civil works, which was the building and the other accessories, as well as the distribution network, was funded by the CB, which is the utility in the country, which costed roughly about $230,000. And the performance, as of now, the average from since 2016, RE contribution is approximately 80%. If you look at the scenarios developed by the software, the optimum scenario was roughly about 75% renewable energy contribution, and the cost of generation approximately it averages from 30 rupees to 40 rupees per unit of energy. This varies based on the season. During the high wind season, which is from May to September, the generation cost goes down. But this is a drastic improvement of what the cost was earlier, which was roughly about 2.2 times higher than this earlier. The good news is, because of the success story of this elutive project, mind you, it was a grant, partly grant from ADB and the balance was from the CEB. The CEB decided, let's continue the same for the other islands, mainly for another 3 islands in the same region where the system is much similar, the supply is unreliable, and it is being fed by old diesel generators with high maintenance cost. So CB decided, and they want to replicate it in 3 more islands, namely Nainativ, Analaitiv, and Delft, with these capacities. And the bidding, the designs are completed, bidding documents are ready for this component, and the bidding will commence in May next month for this configuration. An estimate cost for these 3 islands is roughly about $12 million. And this is not a grant, this is from a loan, and still CB thinks this is viable and the option for these islands. The future is bright, sunny and windy. One thing about why this system was implemented in the country is because of the clear policy from the government, the current or the previous or the continuous governments. The clear policy of 100% electrification at any cost. For the mainland, the distribution networks were expanded without considering the economic and financial analysis, because it was a government policy to provide 100% electrification. And what was isolated was these isolated islands in the northern peninsula, of course due to the geographical limitations, but this has been rectified through this renewable energy microgrids. And when we were starting this project, it was the first of its kind in the country. Everyone was not too sure whether this could work, and now the system had been running for almost 3 years. It's functioning, so that is why they are replicating. And so this is one case study from Sri Lanka. That's the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Anishka. It was indeed very insightful presentation. I was actually thinking that this project is very promising, and maybe the replication of this project for other island states could be very beneficial. I have just one quick question though from my side, but of course we'll move on to the next presenter.
Sure.
Just one thing, that has there been any brainstorming on finding the options other than the diesel generator as a backup, or is it still not very viable to go for the other options?
No, I mean, it is still possible based on the simulations we conducted. It is possible to leave away with the diesel generator, but it's based on the oversized capacities of the other renewable energies. And also the cost associated with that. But for reliability purposes, we will still keep the diesel generators for any emergency or reliability. If you look at the carbon emissions reductions, it roughly, I think if I remember correctly, it was roughly about 85,000 kilograms of carbons annually from the earlier system, and it had reduced to 8,000. Still there's emission, but considerable amount of reduction. To answer your question, it is possible, but it was not considered that way. One is because of the cost, and on the other hand, it's because of the reliability requirements.
That's right, sir. Okay, there is one quick question again from Mr. Yugal Kishore. He's asking that the per unit cost for the project that you indicated with 75% penetration of renewables was 30 to 40. cents per kilowatt hour, which seems quite high compared to the countries we have. They have just 12 to 14 cents per kilowatt hour most of the times. Is it because of the islands, isolated grids? That's why.
Correct. The question is about the cost of generation.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, it is still high because of the size of the system. If you look at the economies of scale, still these investments are expensive. But if you look at a larger system, the situation could be different. But you are correct. Average generation cost in the country is roughly about 10 to 14 cents dollars in the country. This is more than that. But one thing on the other side, the tariff is universal. So the tariff, even um, resident of these islands pay is the same as from the mainland.
Right, sir. One more question from Mr. Assen, who is a research fellow here at SAARC Energy Center. He's asking
Sure.
that, do you have any rough estimate of the battery life in these projects?
13 years.
13 years. And these must be lithium ion.
That's right.
Okay. That's great, sir. Thank you very much. We'll just proceed to the next presenter now. I would request Mr. Anishka that you may stay till the end of the session. We may also ask more questions if there comes up. It's of course depending on your availability. So we would be just moving now to Mr. Gargo. Mr. Gargo is the head of Siemens PTI Middle East, and he will be joined by his colleague, Mr. Yugal Kishore, who is the operations manager at Siemens LLC. They will be presenting on the topic of hybrid renewable power plants, a global perspective on technology trends. Mr. Gargo holds a master's in electrical engineering and holds an MBA. He has a wide experience on a variety of power engineering projects, including the feasibility studies on power plants, grid code assessment studies, and smart grid infrastructure studies. I would request Mr. Gargo to proceed with the presentation. I'll just shift the screen controls to this. So, Mr. Gargo, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Your voice is audible. Yes, your voice is audible. You can proceed with the presentation.
Okay, and can you see the screen? That's the second question, first of all.
Yes, we can see the screen as well.
Okay, perfect. So good morning or good afternoon, everyone, or good evening, actually, where we are joining from. Thank you for the introduction. As said, my name is Gergő. I'm looking after Siemens PTI in the Middle East. You might heard it or know about PTI. PTI is basically the network planning and the consulting, power system consulting department in Siemens, and we are basically based with my colleague Mr. Yugal in Abu Dhabi in UAE, and looking after the entire region, starting from North Africa, covering the Gulf countries, and then going a little bit up in Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, and closing the circle in Pakistan. So today we are going to talk about the hybrid power plants in a little bit on a global perspective, technology trends, and so on and so on. What the real content is, and let me swap, is something like this. So a few words about a few introductory words, and then some things about the economics of the hybrid power plants. What are the typical operational and design challenges? What is the solution of basically operating multiple renewable assets? What could be or what are, based on ongoing projects, the system level benefits for these hybrid systems, and what could be the typical regulatory and policy related drivers to move towards these hybrid power generation plants. And then we have 2 or 3 case studies to be shared, basically just to give a flavor what was done recently, what savings they achieved with these solutions, and then what could be the way forward for new hybrid power plants around the region, around the globe, if you like. Hybrid systems, we know that none of the power generation sources are perfect. Whether we talk about conventional power generations, whether we talk about renewables, they all have their ups and downs. For example, if you take solar or wind, solar works as long as the sun's up. Wind works as long as the wind is blowing. But then if we have a less windy situation in a dark place, then basically we cannot really utilize efficiently either the wind turbines or the solar plants. So what is the solution? Situation came up, and okay, let's combine the things together. And then when it's up and sunny and probably less windy, maybe in a daytime in a special weather condition, then we can use solar. And then if it becomes evening, darks up, and then wind starts blowing, for example, then we can use the wind part of the hybrid system. Obviously, at some point, diesel generators are still yet to be used in hybrid systems. Simple reason behind, because the first pilot project or the first implementation of these hybrid systems were in locations where which were basically remote locations, if you like, so being far away from the utility grid, meaning that developing an infrastructure, a transmission or distribution infrastructure, just to get the loads basically connected to the grid would have been so complicated and so capex sensitive that another solution has to be developed. Previously, we started, or actually people started with diesel generators. We know that, yeah, diesel generators are often reliable. However, the issue comes when they are running low on fuel. And especially we are talking about an area, let's say, with which is an island, or which is in a hills or an uphill area where it's really complicated to get the fuel delivered, then it becomes actually a reasonable question then whether we really need to go for diesel or we need to combine these hybrid sources. So one of the typical case study or one of the typical situation where the hybrid power plants can come to the picture is communities without basically access to the power grid, because then we can combine the various sources of energy, and then basically if you like, we can balance out the portfolio of the power generation. So we can use wind when it's windy, we can use solar when it's sunny, or alternatively, if it's dark and the wind is not blowing, then we still have an option to run, kick in the diesel generators and then provide power based on these fossil fuel-based technology. In a full hybrid system, the engines usually runs continuously, and the wind and the solar is basically subsidizing the power generation depending on the weather conditions. And then the whole aim is to find a balance when bringing in the solar, or bringing in actually the renewable part with its associated capex, to reduce the OPEX of the whole system, or basically to reduce the fuel cost. Usually renewables are connected to the inverters, we know that, and this basically synchronously match to the power frequency and the voltage to basically follow the load and the voltage deviations in the network, or voltage profile in the network. As long as the engine works and the diesel fuel lasts, system availability is high. Obviously, if fuel goes down, then we need really to have the backup from the renewable sources. Another question comes, what to do with storage? Yes, storage is a good thing. Battery storage is spreading. Currently, the price is going down significantly globally, though they are still actually fairly expensive, or actually they are getting more and more expensive as the required size of storage system is increasing. Few words about the economics and then how they look like. So if you imagine a triangle, which basically considers fuel, wind, and the solar on the 3 sides of the triangles, and then we have on each corner point of the triangle, for example, as seen on the left bottom side, when 0% solar, 100% fuel, 100% diesel generator, 100% wind, 0% fuel, and obviously somewhere up here would be the 0 fuel and then 100 solar and the wind. And the middle, if this where basically an equal amount of share is given to diesel, solar and wind generation, and then the various cost curves are basically generated based on the proportional amount of renewable energy sources. So an optimal system or a least cost system could be somewhere when we are equally distributing the power, or basically the load among the 3 different type of sources, including the fossil fuel-based diesel generators and the wind and the solar systems. Typically, when we install a 1 megawatt turbine or a unity megawatt of wind turbine, we can actually save up 130 tons of diesel fuel per year. These are rough figures, obviously depends on many conditions, depends on the site, depends on the fuel cost in a specific country. Fuel cost would actually depend on also many other factors, but this is just a rough estimation. As far as solar is concerned, with approximately 100 kilowatt peak solar farm, we can free up 44 tons of diesel in a particular year. So that could be the base of the economical argument when people start talking about the hybrid systems. This is a few tables combining different options, considering diesel PV installation, which is, let's say, an existing site with different cost of diesel fuel, 0.7 euro per liter, 1 euro per liter, and 1.34 euro per liter. In this particular settings, no additional capex is required. This is just running as it is at the moment. And the cost of energy comes something like that. Obviously, the lower the cost of energy, the generation cost, if you like, as the lower the fuel cost is in the particular setup. And this comes with a, in this particular example, with a small renewable shares. Now, if we add a wind turbine generator with 500 to 560 kilowatt capacity, so it's a small wind turbine, even an older design wind turbine, which can be a double-fed induction generator, not necessarily a fully converted one. And we assume that the fuel cost remain unchanged, so that we have 3 scenarios for the fuel cost. Then we have a certain capex that comes to the picture, but the cost of energy significantly actually drops down. This is now because we have 54% share of renewable energy, and then basically they can be used to decrease the fuel cost in the particular setup. So again, third scenario, where we have a little bit more wind installed. And then the important thing to notice here is that compared to the 500 kilowatt wind addition, which was a certain capex, which comes with a certain capex, going to 1 megawatt wind has only a plus 10% capex. So the per unit, if you like, capex is actually decreasing as we are adding a larger turbine, because the construction cost, the civil works, it all remains the same. It's actually the only changes in the particular size of the turbine and a little bit on the converter side, which is not so significant compared to the civil cost and the transporting the actual turbine to the location, and so on and so on. So with this third scenario, we can even drop down because of the increased renewable shares more on the fuel cost. And this could be the base of the argument. So if you see on the right hand side, there is a small comparison that when it's only a fuel on only an existing installation, then we have a certain fuel, which is usually an OPEX, it's an operating cost, versus the capex that comes with the renewable installation plus the reused OPEX, which basically the result of adding renewable generation to the whole installation. And this kind of comparison can be basically the basis of the investment or the investment appraisal for the hybrid plants. So what are the typical challenges, operational and design challenges for such installations? We know that for any renewable site, I'm not talking about hybrid at the moment, for any kind of renewable, generations are typically far from the load. Usually the wind is blowing and the sun is shining in an area where not necessarily too many people living. So we need to do transmission investment. We need to decide whether we transmit from via AC or DC system. We need to have a right forecasting tool for the wind and for the solar irradiation. We need to have extra compensation equipment maybe. And then from operation point of view, we have stability issues in the network. We could have reverse power flow. If you have a network which has significant amount of rooftop PV, for example, installed in a specific area, it can happen that on a sunny day, the actual loads became power producers instead of power consumers, and the whole power actually start flowing from the low voltage network upwards to the transmission network. Voltage profile requirements and negative energy prices could be there. If it's an open market, then it can happen that the increased renewable energy shares will actually promote negative energy prices or will result in negative energy prices. So you need to be aware that how you are dealing with these things. And a few other obvious challenges are there. Let me shift forward to the hybrid challenges. Site dependency is a key factor. Site survey needed, long-term data collection is needed, forecasting again whether the site that you are planning for the hybrid system is windy enough, it's sunny enough, and so on and so on. Hybrid system design is also complicated. Power needs to be supplied in a reliable way under all or actually the various varying weather conditions. We need to maximize the total cost and maximizing the system efficiency. Lots of simulation is required, and then real-time data collection is also needed once the system is running to make sure that it's always running on the least cost solution point. Economic viability is a question mark, whether it's worth putting money into the whole investment. And then further challenges can be the location, as we discussed, as a primary driver for the cost analysis. When we have a remote area which lacks of roads, or where we need to transport fuel with helicopters or another, or through islands that the colleagues from the ADB were discussing in the island microgrid project, it's all increasing the cost and then also increasing the cost actually of having reliable power. Battery storage, we know it can be a solution, but at the moment it's expensive, so not necessarily the best solution for remote areas when it's already costly enough to basically deploy these sites or these solutions. Typical risks risk profiles when it comes to these hybrid projects at the development stage is basically the location selection, the technology selection, whether there is a grid connection or not, what is the permitting story, how the land acquisition works. And then once all these challenges are tackled, then project development is getting done. Then comes to the construction phase, actual site conditions, the EPC phase, whether the whole EPC company is capable of doing it, what are the civil challenges that you need to tackle when you are basically developing these sites, and so on and so on. And obviously in construction side, the regulatory changes can come to the picture. You might start building a system, but the regulatory requirements are changing, so you need to modify it. And then operational aspects are the reliability of the equipment, the sustainability, the local conditions, local operating and maintenance competencies, how to run the system, and then comes the interest rates, the labor cost, and also regulatory challenges. Few words, let me rather show it on a picture actually that is more meaningful, how to control it. We have a network analyzer looking into the actual load, and then basically we have the inverters, and then we have the PV farms, for example, the PV panels, and the whole system is linked together in a metered and automated computerized system that actually decides where to run the diesel more when you have high demand, for example, and the solar is or the wind, if you like, is not sufficient to cover the demand, or when you have excess solar or wind generation, when to back up the diesel, If you have batteries, how to control the batteries, when to charge them, when to discharge them to use it, and so on and so on. System level benefits. We know that bringing renewables to the picture is decreasing environmental pollution, introduces energy savings, supports the global warming initiative with CO2 reduction, and then provides opportunities, employment opportunities, and job opportunities. Diversify the fuel supply, actually the primary energy supply, if you like, and then also gives up the possibility to or introduces the possibility for distributed generation sources like rooftop PVs, small generations, and then combining them together. Typical load profile just on the picture with the wind farm generation capacity superpolied with the solar generation farm comes to a situation in the right hand side basically. So you can notice that in some cases solar peaks during daytime when the wind is not that too much there, so basically they can complement each other to match up with the actual demand profile for a particular installation. And let me go to typical regulatory drivers to move towards to the hybrid plants. It can be a CO2 target, sustainability initiatives, energy efficiency initiative, market-related story like privatization, trading, petroleum dependency and primary fuel import decrement initiatives, IPP generation model, and so on and so on. Initiatives related to job creation, related to poverty alleviation, waste reduction targets, and so on and so on. Many different drivers could be there from a regulatory point of view to move to these solutions. And a few case studies, actually 3 more slides left because I'm a little bit out of my scheduled time slot, sorry for that. One shot here basically talks about hybrid plant with a diesel and wind generation, actually on a mining site. All in all, average 30% of load is taken over by an installed wind generator, which has a 1.3 megawatt capacity. Actually, it's 3 wind turbines coming up all together, 1.3 megawatt, with a 5 megawatt diesel engine on the same place, supplying a 3.5 megawatt peak demand. And with this 30% renewables in share, there was a possibility to decrease 4,800 tons of fuel per year. Basically, each of these turbines at the end paid up within 3 months, which is, I think, certainly great rate of return, if you like. Another fuel saving opportunity, it's for a hybrid PV system, PV and diesel system for a remote island. You can see that in some cases there is an overcapacity of the PV production, and then there was a need to basically back down the diesel generators because lots of PV was available, ended up with 500 tons of fuel saving in a year. This opportunity could have been for battery installation because of the lack of overcapacity. It might have been a good solution to install some battery storages, but at the end, this was not part of this particular assessment. And the last one is basically a wind diesel system again, comparing 2 options. When we have a smaller amount of wind power against larger amount of wind power, and then with battery storage installed against no battery storage installed. And then obviously option 2 is an increased case of renewable share in the particular scenario. You can see that the more renewables with the battery storage promotes actually instead of 1,000 up to 1,400 cubic meter of year diesel saving, so 40% more saving. However, capex is significantly higher here, actually 35% higher than in the first option. So it could be a good question whether these fuel savings are really worthwhile based on the increased capex value. So this needs to be analyzed further. For example, conclusions at the end, combination of energy sources will provide more reliable power by diversifying the energy sources. These propane, gasoline, they can produce power on demand and then basically can self-start when the renewable sources are not there. natural gas, if possible, can be piped to some areas. When the wind or the solar energy is available, these fossil fuel ones can be shut down, reducing the fuel cost and basically taking over the main role of generation. And obviously the cost could be higher at the end with the combined hybrid systems, but the reliable power is that more important to these particular areas. And then I think this would be everything from our side in Siemens. Thank you for the attention, and then any questions, please feel free to ask anything either now or later in the QA session.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gago. I really appreciate that you quickly wrapped up your presentation, though you have much on the plate. I have a pile of questions right now, but we would prefer to ask you at the end of the third presentation. But I would just quickly ask one question just to have a good transition to our next presentation, which would be
Sure.
also to grid-connected power plants. So the question is from Mr. Talal, who says that why diesel generators are being preferred for hybrid renewable plants instead. GT-based plants provide less generation cost and good flexibility in operation along with higher stability.
Yeah, so I mean, depends on look. At the moment, these hybrid plants are rather deployed to some sensitive areas, for example, a remote village or a military installation, or in a smaller scale system where you don't need really large industrial GTs to run the system, and it would be actually very costly as well to do that. And then the smaller scale system can be run on diesels, and then with a combination of few turbines or a PV installation with maybe a few hundred square meter site, which is basically not significant. I mean, if you think about the diesel generators can be purchased with this size for a few $100,000, let's say, but if you go to gas turbines with higher capacity and then you try to put it to a larger side, then it can be a few $10 million capex as well coming into the picture anyway. And the utilization is also a question. I mean, if you put a larger turbine and then you don't utilize it, then you are just running on a least or a low load condition, then it's not necessarily the best way to run gas turbines anyway.
Okay, thank you very much. So I would request you to stay a little further with us, and we'll be asking some more questions at the end of the session. So I would now invite the next presenter, who is Mr. Jawad Siddiqui. He is the Senior Manager, Sapphire Renewables Pakistan, and he will be talking on the design and operational aspects of hybrid wind solar power plants. Mr. Jawad happens to be a Fulbright scholar with solid experience in project coordination, data analysis, energy regulatory affairs, and he has an extensive field work as well. So I would now shift the screen control to Mr. Jawad. So over to you,
so Bilal, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. We can also see your screen.
Okay, that's good. So good morning and good afternoon to everyone who's online hearing to this webinar. Thank you, Bilal and SAARC's Center for this opportunity to present on this very important topic, especially when we consider the energy space in Pakistan, where the government is currently working on a policy. And we feel that such intuitive and innovative solutions should be captured within the policy to ensure that renewables get more voice in and more percentage and more share in the energy pie. I'd like to thank the first two presenters who talked about the hybrid system, and predominantly they were focused on microgrid level installations. However, just to give you a short introduction of Sapphire, that we're in the renewable energy business as an independent power producer in Pakistan. We are currently Pakistan's largest wind power producers with 200 megawatts of wind installed and connected to the grid. So we operate in a grid connected mode in a megawatt scale energy space, and we're supplying energy to the grid. So most of this presentation and what I'll be talking through in the next few slides will definitely be focused on hybridizing large-scale independent power producer scale, megawatt scale renewable energy power projects. So just to start off, as we all know that renewable hybrids, they combine multiple, in our view, they combine multiple renewable energy generation sources, for example, wind and solar. And there's also the possibility of inducting storage in the form of either chemical storage, batteries, pump storage, or thermal storage. Now, if you just have a look at the schematic on the right-hand side of the slide, generally the three elements, the three inputs, if we talk about wind, solar, and storage, they get all combined through an advanced control system that manages, monitors, and controls the generation assets to optimize the output energy mix. Now, they are ideal in cases where we have multiple energy sources that complement one another. For example, wind and solar. The two presenters before also talked about complementarity. And in addition to locations where we have challenges like limited land availability or weak grids with limited evacuation limits, high capacity factor expectations, and avoidance of additional grid infrastructure investments. So if you just have a look at this graph profile, this is in fact from our wind power projects located in Sindh, Pakistan, where you can see that the wind and solar profiles, they complement each other for quite a few number of hours throughout the day. So just to have a global overview of how things have progressed, we feel that there have been disruptions across the renewable energy supply chain across the world, where projects have become more bankable and marketable due to the maturity of renewable technologies like wind and solar over the years. Capital is now more readily available for these, as well as mature market participants are capable of better country risk assessments. Moving forward, we feel that embracing storage's potential to disrupt the traditional power markets is something that will assist renewables, which are unfortunately for now tagged as variable resources. However, just like the two presenters before me talked about distributed generation, they've already, this hybrid concept has already made its way into that energy space and is generating value. But we feel that with falling storage prices at an IPP scale, a megawatt scale, this is also possible. And with the digitalization of industries, we can actually implement solutions where we have a mix of renewables with storage integrated together to make sure that renewables are both competitive against baseload power generators, as well as they can get rid of that tag of intermittency. Just having a look at some of the few projects, I'm sure that one of our presenters is from India, and they will be talking about the renewable energy policy and hybrids that they recently came up. We have been following that closely, and we feel that it's a direction, it's a move in the right direction. Because considering developing markets, we feel that we have this opportunity to actually leapfrog, similar to mobile telephony, and ensure that rather than going through that actual learning curve of developing large-scale renewable projects of wind and solar, standalone wind and solar, and then moving forward towards this hybrid system, we can actually start off and kick off hybridizing renewables at present, and to make sure that they are competitive with other more dirtier and expensive technologies. So just to look at the projects in India, they came up with their policy, and I think they also did their first round of bidding as well this year. There have been developments in Australia. There's this Clark Creek wind farm. They were working on it, and construction was due to begin in this year. Everyone knows about the large-scale Tesla battery installation in Australia, which significantly helped the ancillary market within Australia there. We're also aware of a large wind power plant, hybrid wind power plant, which goes by the name of the Kennedy Wind Power Park, which is probably the first large-scale IPP mode installation in Australia. So we're closely following that as well. And there have been developments in the US as well. So what are hybrid options when it comes to wind and solar? Because now the presentation is predominantly focused on wind and solar, because like I showed the previous profile from our existing location, wind and solar, they complement each other quite well at the location where our existing power plants are located. And we feel that Pakistan is blessed with this complementarity of multiple renewable resources at one location, and I think we should just draw the best value out of it. So when we talk about connection scenarios, we have primarily two options. Either we start off with a greenfield installation, or we retrofit one renewable technology into an existing renewable plant to improve its grid utilization and capacity factors. So when we talk about brownfield sites, it's extension in existing projects, ideal for cases where there's either land and availability, planning constraints, environmental concerns coupled with expensive supporting infrastructure. And we have then greenfield sites where we have an ideal, which are ideal for an optimized mix to achieve higher capacity factors and most optimal LCOEs. Now, I understand that with different turbine manufacturers and PV suppliers, there are a number of options that are available in the market currently to integrate these two technologies together. One of which is the integration at the turbine level, and the other is at the plant level. So, however, both of these, they come with their challenges in terms of commercial challenges, particularly in terms of metering and stuff, which we will be talking later in the presentation. So we feel there's great value to be added when we hybridize renewables, because firstly, it helps increase your annual energy production through the most efficient use of complementary wind and solar resources in greenfield and brownfield installations. It helps remove that tag of intermittency with wind and solar, because the complementarity addresses the challenge of variation and allows better power planning at the grid level as well, because the generation profile can closely follow demand in many regions. We also feel that with hybridizing these large-scale power plants, it helps improve grid utilization and ancillary support, because more electrons can be fed into the grid at the same cost to the grid, and it helps improve frequency control and voltage variations through inverters and battery storage for the grid. So there's value to be added for everyone, for the independent power producer as well as for the grid. However, we have, as developers, come across a number of challenges to hybridizing our existing assets and thinking of going for greenfield assets. First of which is that technology unfortunately has outpaced policy evolution in many parts of the world. Policy frameworks do not embrace technology investments as quickly as possible. We're aware of that. There's a lack of policy instrument which enhances sector risks and impacts availability and cost of capital, which ultimately drives up the costs for doing such projects. And just like I said in the very start, that we are at an important juncture in Pakistan where we can decide to leapfrog conventional ways of developing renewables like they were in the West, and in fact going to hybrids moving forward rather than just sticking to standalone large-scale power plants. There are, in general, issues with land leases. I'm sure the gentleman from India, he will be talking about this because we read a lot about land issues within India, which was in fact a driver for the hybrid policy. The main challenge here is the existing lease application for installation of solar plants and brownfield installations, and possible usage of the buffer area at existing power plants. And lastly, because the policy has lagged behind technological advances, so there is a non-availability of workable tariff models. So unfortunately in Pakistan, we are yet struggling with tariff models in terms of blended tariffs for hybrid RE plants versus tariffs for individual technologies. So since we do not have a policy in place, the regulators and the government here have not recognized a way forward on having blended tariffs or how to accommodate hybridization of existing brownfields and awarding them a tariff. Apart from some policy challenges, there are definitely technical challenges that we have very extensively studied and have reviewed over quite some time now. One of which is the weak and saturated grids that we see in Pakistan. So we have these grid constraints and evacuation constraints that all independent power producers have to live with. And this is what perhaps one of the greatest challenges here with us, because with weak grids we have issues of outages and curtailments, and these tend to offset the envisaged energy yield gains from these hybrids. Secondly, the grid throughput limitations on brownfield installations, they limit the gains and the value to be added from the hybridization of existing assets and greenfield installations, because they tend to then lead the developers to curtailments of either solar or wind, and because of that that generally brings down the value within this proposition quite drastically. Improving technologies enhance energy curtailment risks. Now, this is something very important to understand, for which we've also included this graph on the graphic on the right. Generally, what we've seen with our brownfield plants, and these graphs are based on actual assessments from our existing power plants, is that the level of curtailment of energy, given that the grid evacuation, we have a limit on the grid evacuation, the level of curtailment is a function of the other technologies advancements. So for instance, in our case, for solar PV curtailments, the level of curtailment is a function of the turbine efficiency on brownfield installations, where we have a limit on the evacuation. So if you just have a look at the graphic on the right, you see the capacity factors for our wind power plants, how they've drastically changed over our two set of projects in a span of just 4 years. And just have a look at the amount of curtailment in solar PV that we have to, the energy that we have to curtail and lose on account of the limited energy, the evacuation limit. Yeah, and it's important to point out that the size of the wind power installation in both cases was the same. So better WTG efficiency has resulted in higher solar curtailments, and so there is this challenge of capturing this curtailment within the financial models for our when we are evaluating during our project development cycle, and there's also a challenge of capturing these within the tariff to make them competitive. There are challenges generally. We haven't seen this in our case, but generally we have studied across the globe that there are challenges of wind turbine shadowing, which limits the solar PV yield and the usable area on the land that is leased for the existing plants. And SCADA integration is definitely an expensive proposition at this stage, because we need a centralized, when we want to hybridize large scale power plants, you need a central SCADA that can monitor SCADAs for both the systems and ensure that the optimal use of both the energies is made possible to make for an economic solution. Metering schemes has been a challenge that we've come across, especially there have been we have offered multiple solutions in previously to the government and to the purchasers, but there's that element of acceptance from them. So because generally the metering schemes are such that they involve intuitive methods of calculating losses and accounting for the amount of energy that was actually delivered from each source, and that has been a challenge from for the power purchaser, in particular for the brownfield installations. However, we feel that storage is probably going to be the biggest disruptor in the energy space across the globe, and will definitely support renewables. And we see great value to be added by addition of storage in such hybrid models, where we can store the curtailed energy and improve the economic and the technical efficiency of the plants by many folds. And so we've listed down just a few benefits of what storage can add to the equation. It helps in baseload transition, where variable renewables are able to provide the bulk of energy, and dispatchable renewables will ramp up as required to meet the demand. You have loss recapture, where integrating storage technologies reduces plant curtailment by storing the excessive power. They help in ancillary services, and moving forward, if policy frameworks develop to a point, there's always the possibility of arbitrage available there. So that's pretty much from my side, but I hope that I have been able to just shed light on the challenges, and that as developers we have faced in the development of hybrid power plants, large scale power plants, which is a touch different from the microgrid installations discussed previously. Bilal, I'm open for any questions if you have.
Thank you, Jawad. So now on to the question and answer session. There are more than 5 questions I have, and probably the best is that I will be turning on the mics of all the presenters here, and we'll start asking the questions, and you can contribute in the answers at your will. So I am just turning your mics on. I'm also like to ask Mr. Irfan Yusuf and Mr. Vibash, who will be presenting in the next round. I have your mics on as well. You can also contribute in the question answer sessions.
Thanks a lot, Bilal, for sharing, for allowing me to contribute. Yeah, it was a very insightful presentation from Jawad Siddiqui. Just to clarify a couple of things, there's indicated by Jawad that there is no such policy existing for hybrid projects. Previously, the projects have been done under the RE policy 2006, and the policy had given ample coverage to those projects, and we issued more than 15 LOIs for that, for hybridizing the existing projects. There's no bar on it, and we are working on those directions. For new initiatives, yes, the policy is underway and soon will be announced. With regards to tariffs, we had also a good discussion in NEPRA. They were cognizant of the facts, and however, since there was an issue with regards to interconnection and allowing these projects to connect it and supply electricity, as did by CPPA, we are still in a discussion in the power division to allow these projects. As soon as the allowance will be available by the power division, the existing LOIs will be moving forward.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for sharing this insight. I would just request Mr. Jawad, Mr. Ranishka, and Mr. Vibash that they have self-muted themselves. You can unmute yourself from your side so that you can participate in the questions. I will. Okay. Jawad, you're okay. Okay. So the first question would be, it's a general question that what should be the right mix in terms of the installed capacities of solar and wind for the projects from the micro level scale to the grid level? So maybe we will start with Mr. Garg first.
Yes.
Yeah. So the question is that what should be the right mix of in terms of installed capacity of solar and wind? Is there any recommended range of right mix?
Recently there were some studies shown that in a equalized way, so I would say maybe half wind solar, or if we have diesel in the picture, 30% or obviously 33% comes out as a least cost energy, because then it's balancing out the portfolio to the maximum. But ultimately it depends on the site location. So if you want to put solar, a large scale solar into a desert area, then yes, you can do that. But once the sandstorms are coming, and then they are, we've seen it recently in the UAE and in Saudi Arabia, that a large sandstorm actually decreased the capacity of a solar farm by 60% within a few minutes cycle, then it brings lots of challenges as well to the picture. So it's obviously always down to the actual site, and then the weather conditions expected to be on the site, and then the available capex ultimately what's dictating the right amount of mix. So there is no one fits to all scenario in this case.
Right. Anybody else want to integrate?
Yeah. Allow me to add to it. I'll show in my presentation. This is just after this session. As it is indicated, there's no any right mix that we can say it's technically financially available. However, in case of Pakistan, what we have been doing and analyzing, since the grid in Pakistan is not that resilient or sophisticated as compared to the developed countries, we need to take into account the grid capabilities, or if there would be any requirements of curtailments. In that perspective, what we have seen that a 50% capacity of installed wind power project can be integrated with solar and can be very viable.
Okay, thanks. The next question is that, particularly addressing Mr. Gargo, that what is the actual, why is there a need of extra dynamic compensation for these kind of hybrid plants?
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute. Look, in any kind of renewable plants, The problem is that the inertia is usually low when you connect a renewable plant to the network. So if you combine, even if you put few hundred megawatt of wind, the inertia is still not equivalent of a few hundred megawatt gas turbine or steam turbine, for example. So it means that the support in the active power frequency control situation, when actually you have generation imbalance in the network, is still not significant enough on its own to provide the right amount of support or compensation. That's probably the reason. That's most probably the reason when you need to add additional dynamic compensation to this. So basically, it's more of a system stability aspect rather than looking into the individual plant itself.
Okay, that's great, sir. The next question is in fact from my side, that generally there are forecasting errors for solar and wind, each to its own degree. When we hybridize these two technologies, whether the forecasting errors add up mostly, or we see that generally the forecasting errors are compensating each other.
Look, it depends on again the site. If you have a site when you know that historically sunny during the daytime and less windy, and in the evening time it becomes more windy and obviously less sunny, then the forecasting errors would actually equalize out each other. If you have a different weather conditions, when the weather is changing rapidly from one day to another and there is no significant pattern that can be recognized, then it's not necessarily so straightforward to decide. But ultimately, since we are combining technologies running on different primary sources, on the sun and the wind, I would rather guess that it's going to a positive direction because they are balancing out each other. But again, it depends on a few things, so not necessarily a straightforward things to answer that, yeah, they add up, or yeah, they actually contradicting each other.
Thank you, sir. Just to remind, I have given the mic controls to Jawad Siddiqui and Mr. Ranishka. If you would like to add to answers, you can always unmute yourself and participate. There is one remaining question that is from Mr. Assan, that are there any significant technical issues of joint operation of solar and wind? And I would just like to add here that to what degree of complexity comes in when we use the available technologies these days for the joint operation of these two technologies.
So Bilal, do you want me to answer?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So like I talked in my presentation, probably the most challenging aspect technically is the SCADA system. Having a centralized SCADA system to ensure that you have the most optimal use of renewable energy, both your renewable energy sources, both solar and wind. And when you add storage to that mix, then ensuring that you have minimized curtailments, minimized solar energy curtailments during durations where, especially for brownfield installations, where you cannot exceed the evacuation limit. So I would rank SCADA as the prime technical challenge in ensuring that you have a harmonized output for the hybrid plant, where it's both economic and financially viable.
So, yeah, Mr. Gago, would you like to add something, or we can proceed to the next question?
So sorry, it was a little bit breaking up for me. Can you quickly repeat the question?
Yeah. The question is that how complex it is to use the available technologies in the world right now to operate the wind and solar plants together in an integrated fashion.
It's actually the technologies are. It's not actually the wind and the solar technologies what are governing. It's more of implementing a plant controller actually that can automatically control the various type of energy generation sources. For example, to ramp down diesels or ramp up diesels or disconnect winds if it's too windy. already, or link these control actions actually together, or charge the batteries or discharge the batteries. So it is more coming down to this plant controller to set up the master and the slave controlling mechanism, and then how it is implemented in reality. The actual technology itself, yeah, it's possible to be used. Obviously, the later technology with these fully converted inverters sitting in front of PV cells and wind turbines are good enough or perfect enough to be used for these installations anyway. So the main question comes down again to how to control it, or how to synchronize the controls together to get a meaningful output from the hybrid plant.
That's one remaining question, which is in fact more related to the grid operations. But I guess with the renewables coming in, and especially hybrids, that becomes relevant. So the question is that how effective is the storage bank in replacing the gas generators as spinning reserves?
It's not effective yet. I mean, the storage banks, they also have some time to discharge the capacity, and again, they don't have really an inertia behind, or a rotating mass behind that would actually drive the active power and the frequency control. So at the moment, I wouldn't replace gas turbines with battery storage for sure.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. Perhaps that's the end of our first session. We are pretty much in time control, though we are just 10 minutes late, but I would request all to be bearing this with us. So the next session is on the policy and pathways, and I would first invite Mr. Irfan Yusuf, who is the director at Alternate Energy Development Board, Pakistan. Mr. Irfan has a PhD in civil engineering and has more than 10 years of experience in renewables policymaking, especially in Pakistan. So I would request Mr. Irfan, I will just send the controls to you. So now you can start your presentation, sir.
Thanks a lot, Bilal, and of course, much appreciated to SAARC Energy Center for providing me opportunity to give an overview of how hybrid solar PV and wind projects are being undertaken in Pakistan, and what are the policy perspective in this regard. I'll share my thoughts very quickly, and also share one of the case studies that have been done so far. I'll try to be quick so that I can take several questions afterwards. Need not to explain a lot about introducing hybrid systems, as the other speakers in the first session have already talked about this. I'll skip this slide. However, I just would like to emphasize more on this slide. What are the perspective and why a country like Pakistan is looking at hybrid as an option? We feel that this increases the capacity factors and the great utilization factor of the power plant, that basically lowers the levels cost of energy as well. This efficiently utilizes the national assets, particularly the grid network that has been commissioned by the National Transmission and Dispatch Company in Pakistan, where a country like Pakistan, where the grid is owned by the federal government, and this is a national asset, its utilization is maximized by the hybridizing the plants. Capacity factors, which are currently at the ranges of 31 to 35%, if we hybrid with solar, this definitely go up and ranges between 45 to 50%, which is not only better for the utilization, but also the power equator and transmitter, and for other prospective uses. Just to give you overview of how the Pakistani government is looking at it, and how we are encapsulating, hybridizing the wind solar. From it basically is covered in 3 different regions, 3 different areas, different concepts. We can call it likewise is how to conception it, what would be the strategic decision we have to take, and what the hybrid platform we need to create. Because from the conceptual point of view, there are three important things to look at. First is the resource potential, which is need to be identified. We need to have zones, we need to have the areas where we can hybridize the things. Then technical and financial evaluation, this is very important. We need to know, is it technically and financially viable to execute the plant, to interconnect the plants, and to evacuate the power generated from these plants. And of course, life cycle management is very important. Likewise, we need to understand the plants which are being operated or being executed planned in certain area. How will this be managed during the life of these plants? We need to have a strategic decision in this regard. Likewise, there are four considerations, at least for my point of view. The first one is maximizing utilization of RE resource, land, and grid space. This is very important. Then stabilizing the power coming out from the variable energies. As everyone knows, as individually both wind and solar are very variable. However, integrating and hybridizing both, we can somehow reduce this variability and improve this grid stability. With that, we can also have some innovative plant designs. Integrating battery storage can be one of the options. There are certain other options available that are being utilized by different countries, including the pump storage or heat storage kind of activities that also be taken in while designing the plants. Innovative power procurement mechanisms, likewise, how the power will be procured, how the plants will be executed. These are the strategy kind of decisions that need to be taken into account. Hybrid platform, this hybrid platform which we are talking about, it has to be considered in 4 different parameters. One is we need to have some kind of specified RE zones where not only resources are available, but also evacuation capacity is available. Private sector, of course, is very important player to that hybrid platform. The private sector is willing, up and coming industry to invest, eager to execute the projects. Technology solution providers, these are the EPC contractors, designers, and executors, what the main key player. And economic RE power from hybrid projects is another thing, because countries like Pakistan, where the electricity is already expensive, we need to curtail the energy prices coming out from the power plants. And if hybridizing the plants make the power economical, that's become the ideal hybrid platform. We have undertaken a study with the support of different wind power projects. As representative from Sapphire has given a presentation in the first session, they were one of the counterparts of ours, and there are some other consultants in the market. We had undertaken different perspectives and different ways of integrating and envisaging how the existing wind power projects can be integrated with the solar power plants, and how the new power plants can be considered as hybrid power plants. I'll show the details later on. For the existing power plants, what principles we have taken into account, because there are some grid constraints at the grid level. We have to curtail the power to the plant capacity size of the wind power project. This is a unique case in Pakistan, might that not be applicable to other countries, but here in Pakistan, for existing power projects, we need to limit, and there's in order to manage this electricity loss, there are 2 ways: either to design the power plant in a way that this curtailment should be minimum, or we can take advantage of battery storage or energy storage technologies to get integrated to this whole mechanism. Just to share the case studies in Jampir, this says around 1000 megawatts. The number is now touched to 1237 megawatts that's been installed in the current Jampir area. NTDC, which is the state-owned company that interconnects the power plants and evacuates the power, has confirmed that around 1750 megawatts can be integrated in the current location where the power plants are executed. While interconnecting the power plants, NTDCL take into account the 100% capacity while designing the grid integration studies. As everyone knows that there are very limited time periods when the full capacity of wind power plant is up and running, and most of the times the capacity remains low. Annual plant capacity factor usually remains 31 to 37%. This is an ideal situation where we can hybridize the existing wind power plants with the solar power plants so that we can increase the grid utilization. I'm presenting a microscopic analysis of single solar power plant. In addition to the fact that solar and wind are complementing during the day, solar irradiance peaks during the daylight hours. As you can see, starting from 6 in the morning to 5 in the evening, this is the usual span of the solar day, and you can also see between 9:30 to 1:30, this is a peak period of solar in Pakistan. Whereas wind remains very variable all the day. In addition, some parts of the day it goes lower than the zero. In some parts of the day it remains above. You can say 12 or 13 meter per second as well, and it depends upon the turbine capacity and turbine model. It can generate different kind of electricity, different numbers of electricity all the day. If we hybrid these plants in a way that we install 50 megawatt solar and 50 megawatt wind, of course the megawatt hour per annum increases a lot, particularly during the day period, and we can see a huge difference. That previously, when we were getting 50 megawatt hour on an annual basis, the electricity during the daytime increases up to 65 to 68 megawatt hours per annum, which is great in incremental potential available by hybridizing the solar with the wind. Again, a microscopic view in form of a tabular chart that indicates if we're installing wind and solar separate and hybridizing, what will be the annual energy output. We can clearly see that by hybridizing the wind and solar, it increases the annual energy power output to a large extent. This is just a pictorial of shadow analysis we did for installing solar power plants, and then we did a broader perspective to think bigger. We will of the view that if there can be a case when we can install 1750 megawatts solar PV hybridizing with 1750 megawatt wind, what will happen then? This is the map showing solar and wind radiance of Jambi region, and hybridizing in the ratio 50-50, that means total installed capacity comes out around 33,500 megawatts. And you can see a lot. If we only integrate wind, we will be able to getting around 1500 to 1800 megawatts at max. But by installing solar, we can easily achieve 2300 megawatts, which is a great incremental potential by installing the both wind and solar hybrid. As I indicated, we cannot cross the barrier of 1750 megawatts because of the curtailment perspective and issues at the grid evacuation. We did analysis how the curtailments will be happening, and we saw that during the months of March and October there will be no curtailments. In January, April, and November, December, the curtailment will be very low. But in February, May, June, July, and August, September, the curtailment will be very high. That can be in percentage terms, we can say around 12 to 13% will be the curtailments. But the benefit is that if we do this hybridization, the grid utilization will be much higher. In case of solar, the annual average grid utilization remains below 20%. For the wind, of course, it remains within the for 30 to 45%. But if we hybridize it, we can easily go up to 55% grid utilization on an average basis. This is a typical chart showing how the grid effectively be utilized on daily spread. If we do only wind, it will remain below 60%. If we do solar, though during the daytime, it will cross 60%, but as a whole, it will be lower than 20%. But if we accumulate both, we can easily go up to 65 to 70%. And during some parts of the day, we can also touch 100% utilization of the grid. This is a presentation of what we have been discussing. There were some other models we did in addition to 50-50. We also to see how effectively we can reduce the curtailments perspective. We did two variations, 50 to 40 and 50 to 30. The configurations are given below. With that configuration, we also did how the utilization will be improved. Of course, if we do 50-40 and 50-30, utilization reduces, but what effectively it does is that it reduces the curtailment requirements. You can see by 50-50 utilization during the daytime, it remains above 70%. With 50-40, it remains at the range of 90%. And with 50-30, it goes down to 80%. This is a typical on the number sides, what I'm presenting. As opposed to greenfield power project, installation of new grid is not required in these projects. Additional power generation capacity increases the utilization rate of the already grid connected plants. Smaller solar PV plants result in lesser curtailments, and optimization could be done to look at the perfection combination. Here you can see that with 50-30, the annual curtailment becomes less than 1%. With the 50-40 configuration, the curtailment remains between 1 to 3%, and with 50-50 configuration, the curtailment is between 3 to 5%, which is very significant as if we take into account the tariff numbers. Yeah, solar PV and wind hybrid, they're the ideal situation, and they can provide a lot of perspective solutions, and adding energy storage can be very beneficial. Taking this into account, we had already initiated plan to hybridize the existing plants. We issued 15 LOIs so far. We are under discussion with the power regulator what should be the appropriate tariff model. There are 3 tariff models available in the RA policy 2006: cost plus, upfront tariff, and competitive bidding. Our point of view is that this is a very optimal utilization of transmission line and land to hybridize the plant. Energy curtailment risk, though occurs, but that can be shifted to the IPPs. We can develop the security package. We can manage these operational requirements. However, with regards to tariff, for the competition, there are some limitations. Particularly, open competition not possible since land interconnection and the space is for the specific wind power projects, and cost escalation and monopolization among the sponsors can also be a risk. With regards to cost plus, it is unattractive for the IPPs because projects like to quote escalated costs. Projects will try to shift the risk. They can increase the project development period. They can also increase the surplus. They can also cause a kind of a circulation between tariff costs and financial numbers, and that will eventually delay the whole project. For that perspective, we are of the view that there can be one-time upfront or feed-in tariff that can be appropriate choices for the existing projects. With regards to new power plants, we have identified as 6 zones so far. Most of them are located in the Balochistan. 2 are in Sindh. These provide ideal opportunity to develop the zones where we can install wind, solar, hybrid power plants. What is the Before going forward, we need to understand what are the regulatory, fiscal, and policy tools for promotion of hybrid. With regards to regulatory regime, our regulatory regime is very flexible. Government functionaries can easily decide upon the mechanism to procure and quantum of power to integrate. Fiscal tools are very liberal in Pakistan. A bankable security package is already available, and we can also build upon with the support of the private sector institutions. With regards to policy tools, we are in process of developing new policy, and soon it will be announced, and this will cover these kind of interventions, and also going to have a very big target. The numbers given by the policymakers that we are looking at 30% share of power in the future energy mix. That is huge, and keeping this target in view, these kind of interventions can have a lot of room for development in future. Technical consideration of course are very important to know. Capacity of power, capacity power procurement agency, this needs to be taken into account. Power integration requirements at selected sites and power transmission distribution network has to be taken into account so that we should be near to the load centers. What the new wind and solar hybrid projects can do in Pakistan, they can mitigate the resources in uncertainty, they can help in stabilizing the grid, they can expectedly low or reduce the levelized cost of electricity, they can improve the efficiencies, they can build these energies, and integrating energy storage can improve the overall mechanism. What steps need to be taken? This is very important to know because I believe this will be the crux of it. We need to have clear RE policy be announced, supported by bankable security package. This is very essential for the private sector investment. Second, we need to identify the zones, regions, so that each and every private sector party should be knowing that where they want to invest, where the government is taking investment, where the powers will be evacuated, and what the facilities are available. Power evacuation infrastructure needs to be developed in those areas. If we can do two things, either we can put in the bids to ask the developers to bid for power plant and the infrastructure both, but since in most of the cases the evacuator is the government of Pakistan, we can also keep on working with the existing option of engaging NTDC to develop the power infrastructure. We need to have the power procurement capacity designated for each year so that we can give clear signal to the investing market that how much power will be needing by the government to procure from hybrid power plants. And of course, last but not the least, the capacity that will be bidded for evacuation of power. What way forward we are looking at is existing projects to be procured on upfront basis, bankable security package to be developed, managing technical and financial issues. First choice for new power procurement at parks should be RE hybrids, and energy storage should also be considered for stable power supply. This is all my presentation. I'm all open to answer the questions and take part in discussions.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, Dr. Irfan Saab. I will just ask 2 quick questions and then we will move on to the next presentation, and we will be asking questions collectively at the end. I'm very thankful that Mr. Gargu and Mr. Jawad are still with us, and we will be very happy if they participate in the last question answer session as well. So, Mr. Irfan, there is a question from Bangladesh. Mr. Shah Heather Gulbakar has asked that generally in Pakistan also, the interconnection studies are being done for example, for a wind plant of 50 megawatts. So the interconnection for that plant will be based on the 50 megawatt capacity. So when that plant goes to solar, there will be certain infrastructure limitation that will result in the curtailment whenever the plant has a power peak above 50 megawatts. So is this a very big problem for the plant, or how would you have the opinion on that?
Yeah, that is a very pertinent question, particularly with regards to the investment, because investors are very keen to listen to this. For the power plant, this makes no issue, because if I talk about the installation system, technically they can be integrated and they can easily be supplying electricity to the national grid. The issue comes at the end of the power evacuator or national grid, that how much it can evacuate. Unfortunately, the situation at the grid where these existing wind power projects are being installed is that at certain points, since the load center is quite away, there is a situation when the grid becomes in a situation where it get choked due to excessive power, and to manage that choking of the grid, we need to curtail the power, and we have to issue the dispatch order to the wind power projects and the solar power projects to reduce their capacity outputs. So there is no problem at the end of the power plants, but there is some limitations at the end of the evacuation to evacuate all the power. Though the government of Pakistan is working on improving the grid, and if that evacuation issues or constraints are removed, of course there won't be a requirement of any curtailments in the future.
That's very hopeful, sir. So there is another question from Mr. Yugul Kishore, which says that the 50-50% mix ratio of hybrid solution is visible from Pakistan market. This is based on simulation model or experiences? If it's based on simulation, which software tools have been used for that?
No, this is purely on the simulation basis, because we haven't so far seen any kind of a power plant being executed in hybrid model. We're still simulating the things. We have used industry standard solar wind softwares for getting their outputs, and then we have combined their outputs on the daily scale using Excel sheets. So that's saying that how much power will be generated from each source from different time periods. We used for the wind purpose, we used VASP and WindPro, and for the solar we used PVC.
Thank you very much, sir. So now I would move to our last presenter, Mr. Vibash. First of all, I thank you, Mr. Vibash, that you joined the webinar at the very beginning and you are still with us. I'm really thankful to you. So Mr. Vibash Garg is the director at PricewaterhouseCoopers India. Mr. Vibash has diplomas in electrical engineering and renewables with about 20 years of experience in renewable energy consulting. He has also remained as Associate Fellow at the Energy and Resources Institute India, also commonly known as TARI. So Mr. Vibash will be talking on the topic of policy landscape for hybrid renewable deployments in India. So I would, we have actually in fact given the screen controls to Mr. Vibash. So you can now proceed with your presentation.
Is he ready?
Yes, test. So Mr. Vibash, I guess, are you hearing us? So we'll be just in 2 minutes. We'll be just contacting Mr. Vibash too. Okay.
Hello.
Mr. Vibash, can you hear us? Yes, we can hear you.
I can hear you. Okay, great. So good afternoon, and thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak about the on this prestigious webinar on the upcoming opportunity on wind and solar hybrid projects. Well, I have been there since morning, and I have attended all the sessions. There's very little left for me to speak about, honestly. So I'll run through the presentation, but I think there are a couple of things which have already been spoken by other panelists. I think just let me know. I can probably skip also. And as we are running a little late on our agenda, I will have a hard close at 13:50 India time. So we have close to 15 minutes in which I like to, run this whole presentation. So what I'm going to talk about is the agenda points of my presentation are current status of solar and wind installed capacity. Just a bit of it. I mean, and it's not a hybrid thing, and I'm talking about India only. High ramping requirement with solar generation. The challenge which we are facing is why we are looking at solar and wind hybrid possibilities is because of, and one factor is the high ramping requirement. In solar wind hybrid, a solution to smoothing the generation profile. Then we have got three policies at the moment. So one is a draft national policy, which is by the central government of India. Other than that, there are two policies which have been notified by two different states. One is in eastern side, southern eastern side, which is Andhra Pradesh, and the other one is western side, which is Gujarat. So we'll talk about the specifics of those policies. Then we also talk about is where we stand in terms of solar wind hybrid tenders, because we have slightly moved ahead when it comes to large scale grid integrated solar wind hybrid systems. So the kind of tenders which were floated by one of the central government organization, which is called Solar Energy Corporation of India, and then key policy and regulatory measures to incentivize solar wind hybrid from the government side is, what have been proposed in these various policies. So these are the points which I would like to cover. The current status of solar and wind installed capacity, if we look at, and this is just a minute. So now it is move this. So installed capacity in solar, we stand at close to 26 gigawatt, with the tariffs also ranging between 2.5 to 3 rupees on an average basis in last couple of years. So this is what we have achieved in terms of solar tariffs. Similarly, if you look at the wind capacity, wind though started way before then, close to 2 decades before solar, is at 35.3 gigawatt as of today, with almost similar type of tariff structure. And in India, these projects are being awarded through a competitive bidding process. So wherein companies bid on the tariff, and those companies which are giving the maximum discount or the ceiling tariff are the one who are being allotted the project. So if we look at here, the message from the slide is that in terms of tariff, we are almost at par with each other. I'm talking about the solar and wind. The next slide is where we talk about the high damping requirement with solar generation. So if you look at the left side curve, and this is slightly dated, but I couldn't get any better representation of the latest years. So I'm talking about this of 2014 and 2015. So if you look at the kind of demand curve we have for a given day, we have usual peaks in the morning and one in the evening. And these are the times which, when you don't have really, your solar is not really generating a lot, because solar will start generating after 8 o'clock and will generate, say, up to around 5 o'clock and 6 o'clock, depending upon the location within the country. So these two peaks as such does not really be catered by the solar alone. Now, so morning ramp up rate is around 140 megawatt per minute to meet the demand, and evening ramp up rate is 200 megawatt per minute. But when we are adding 20,000, when we have added 20,000 megawatt of solar, the problem actually has increased of this ramping. So what we require at the moment is close to 300 megawatt per minute, with the existing 20,000 plus megawatt of solar. And if we look at the target of government of India, which is 100 gigawatt, this ramping rate will be very, very high. So this is where we see the problem while managing the grid. Now we talk about a kind of a solution which is solar and wind hybrid. The other solution is that we should have so much of a spinning reserve to cater to this demand, and then keeping that high spinning reserve gas based or hydro based or a thermal power based is extremely expensive, because if you are not utilizing that asset, your generation cost goes very, very high. So India does not have that capability to have those type of spinning reserves idle available all the time. So there is one solution which has been looked at is combining wind and solar. And if you look at the right side graphs first, 50% solar plus 50% wind, this is the kind of generation profile we get. And if we had 10% solar and 90% wind, again, this is a very location specific, the generation profile is given. So this is where, right from the 0 hour up to the 24th hour, in most scenario, we are in a position to smoothen the generation profile when we combine solar and grid. And the benefit of this, if you look at in the left side, these three circles, so better grid management, limited investments, and complementary generation profile. Complementary in the sense solar generate during the day and mostly wind, because of its nature, generates usually in the early morning and late evening hours, and throughout the night as also. Wind is usually very less during the daytime. So they complement each other and they give us an opportunity to generate combine as a combined power project and give a better, smoother generation profile. Switch to the next slide. Now we talk about the wind hybrid policy, Government of India's national policy. And this policy, as of today, is in draft shape, has not been finalized yet, but soon it will be finalized. The main objective of the policy is the framework for promotion of large grid-connected wind solar hybrid systems for efficient utilization of transmission infrastructure and land, reducing the variability in renewable power generation. So these are the two major objectives why this government of India has come out with a wind solar hybrid policy. Now, key features. I'm not going to read all these points. This presentation will anyway be available, so somebody who is interested may read it. But major points is that it allows us to connect at the AC or DC both levels. You can use it for captive, you can use it for third party sale, you can also use it to sell it to distribution companies on a discovered tariff, through a competitive bidding process, or if at all there is a tariff given by the state electricity regulatory commission for a wind hybrid solar project. Sale to discom at APPC rate under REC mechanism to and avail RECs. This APPC is annual pool power purchase cost, which is the cost, weighted average cost at which state electricity companies buy power from all the generating plants. So at that cost, distribution companies can also buy power from the generator of solar wind hybrid projects. Then it also helps. We have this concept of RPO and which is a solar RPO and non-solar RPO. Is every state and every designated generator has been given a responsibility to buy a certain percentage of renewable power or to generate certain percentage of renewable power. And we have solar and non-solar, both type of RPOs. And solar RPO was largely to you give a more thrust on solar, that you have to achieve your RPO, solar RPO for a certain percentage of solar, through a certain percentage of solar purchase or generation. So this project will also help them meeting their RPO requirement. Hybridization of existing wind solar power plants they allow, but with certain limitations, like they will not give additional transmission capacity charges, will not be levied. Transmission charges applicable for additional transmission capacity granted as per existing regulations. So various parameters under this policy for the hybridization of existing ones. Battery storage, battery policy permits use of battery storage also. Then regulatory requirements, policy mandates, regulatory authority, CEA, which is a Central Electricity Authority, and CERC, which is a Central Electricity Regulatory Commission, to formulate necessary guidelines, which are yet to be formed. All fiscal and financial incentives available to wind and solar will also be made available to these hybrid projects. Then we talk about the state government policy. This policy is from the government of Gujarat. The operative period is 5 years to from the date of issuance, policy to remain operational, right? Incentives applicable for the period of 25 years, as we signed PPA in India for 25 years. Projects type A, where conversion of existing or under construction into hybrid projects, or type B, which are new solar wind hybrid power projects. Again, existing projects, they've got some integration strategy and tariffs. Then for the new projects, slightly different. So only in the existing projects, because they are connected to the AC network, so only AC integration is permitted and not DC integration is permitted. Whereas for the new projects, AC and DC, both integrations are permitted. Again, I'm not really reading through the lines of these policies, but this is what it is. Then metering arrangement, energy accounting at the substation level, at the consumer level, then group captive, all these are available under the policies. It's a very comprehensively drafted policy which is really promoting. And just on the sideline of this presentation, I can also tell you that this state is planning a 30,000 megawatt worth of park for solar and wind hybrid power projects. So under this policy. Now, sale of power from hybrid plants to captive or third party within the states, these are certain parameters which have been drafted by them, like transmission charges and losses. There's no concession, wheeling charges and losses, 50% concession for captive, cross subsidy surcharge, 50% concession on third party, electricity duty exempted for 25 years in both the scenarios, contracted demand up to 50% of the contract demand in both the scenarios, then wheeling for more than one location is certain percentage, which is 5 paise per unit, which needs to be paid to Discom. They don't allow you to use second-hand wind turbine generators or solar modules under this policy. Then the third policy which has been drafted by the government of Andhra Pradesh. Andhra Pradesh in India has been very proactive in terms of renewable energy generation, very conducive policies for the investors to come in and build the project there. And they want to achieve 5,000 megawatt hybrid capacity under this policy, which is very how do I say it, a very significant number in terms of if you look at the hybrid part. Then operative period, again, this is a 5 years from the date of release of the policy. Incentives to commission projects shall remain applicable for a period of 10 years. So the idea is to to start this as early as possible and not really wait for any other policy changes. Key features, it talks about minimum 40% CUF to be achieved from each megawatt of solar wind hybrid system, which is I wouldn't say is very optimistic, but certainly not very easy to achieve until you're doing your hybridization properly. The key, again, the hybrid power generated may be used for, so they also allow captive use, sale to third party through open access, or sale to Discom. Or again, similar lines to the tariff determined by the APRC or the tariff discovered through the bidding process. Then this will also be used for solar and non-solar RPO fulfillment. Then energy banking and all, 100% banking of energy is permitted throughout the year, which is also very beneficial for the project developers. Banking is adjusted in kind, 5% of energy delivered at point of draw, and other parameters similar to the previous policies. Nodal agency is a state nodal agency in Andhra Pradesh. Incentives, transmission and distribution charges are exempted up to 50%. 50% of electricity duty will also be exempted. Then 50% of cross subsidy charges shall be paid for third party sale, provided the source of power is from these projects within a state. Supervision charges to AP Transco are also exempted. So there are various type of exemptions to promote these projects, and it also has a must-run status. In India, it is not at the merit order dispatch. In case of renewable, it is always a must-run project. So whatever the cost of generation is, if renewables are generating, they will be consumed first. This is the instruction to the load dispatch centers. Then current status of solar wind hybrid tenders. So there are two tenders there are two projects, not tender, which have been allocated. So one is SoftBank, which is working in India along with Bharti Airtel as SB Energy has got 350 megawatt, and Adani has got 390 megawatt. Earlier it was 600, but then it was reduced to 390 at the given tariff, which is very reasonable, 2.67 and 2.69. These projects have been allocated, but they are yet to come up. The projects are under construction. Then in the second phase, they have also announced the bidding of another 1200 megawatt ISTS, which is interstate transmission system, connected solar wind hybrid power projects. The bidding is yet to happen. So one project has been awarded, and the other project is to be awarded. But prior to that, there was one more 100 megawatt range of smaller project in Andhra Pradesh, which is running and is operating. The key policy and regulatory measures to incentivize solar wind hybrid policies is formulation of regulation and technical standard by CE and CRC, concession open access charges as an initial promotional measures, and these are the parameters which are in general and will be beneficial when we draft a policy for solar wind hybrid power projects. So a couple of points we have mentioned here: allowing banking of energy, then allowing battery storage technologies as a part of solar wind hybrid, then allowing existing wind or solar projects to convert to a hybrid project, development of common RPO mechanism that allow obligated entities to claim fulfillment of our solar and non-solar, because we have got both the technology, solar and non-solar, so they should allow us to claim both the benefits. Development of common tariff mechanism for wind hybrid plants. So development of common tariff mechanism in our case is because we have gone on the instead of feed-in tariff regime to the competitive bidding regime. So there's only one common tariff at which projects are won by the developers. I think this is it. I hope this was sufficient for the audience. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Vibash. We learned a lot from your presentation. I would like to quickly ask one question from you, that if we take some big learnings from this webinar, can you suggest one biggest policy recommendation to promote hybrid concepts?
See, I'm not really aware about is how other SAARC member countries are developing or promoting their renewable energy projects. If I talk about the India per se, and that's not really specific to solar wind hybrid, but it is. There are two things which are very important, which I have seen in of late in last 8 years, the development of renewable. Number one is to develop the ecosystem along with the infrastructure, and that should be done at the government level itself, and it should not be left for the private developers when you are really starting your large renewable energy projects. So what I want to say here is, like, if you can develop a solar park, the location which is very fertile for solar and wind projects. If you can develop a solar park wherein developer can come and have a plug and play mechanism, like all the infrastructure is ready, they come set up their project and start generating, and you are ready, government is ready to evacuate. That is one very important thing which should come through the government side or the policy maker side. Another important point is to have this competitive bidding mechanism instead of going for a feed-in tariff mechanism. So these are the two very important parameters from my perspective.
Indeed, sir. I would also like to invite everyone who still is with us. Mr. Gargo is there, Mr. Irfan is there, Mr. Jawad is there. So I have a couple of more questions you can add at your will. It will be grateful for all the audience. So the first question is that what should be the right tariff scheme for hybrid plants? Should it be the blended tariff scheme or a separate tariff for individual technology?
So if you ask me, I would say it has to be blended, because it will be difficult, to select. Or otherwise, if you have a feed-in tariff mechanism, then you can have a separate tariff for both solar and wind. But if you want to allocate it through the competitive bidding process, and then I think it would be more convenient to have a blended tariff.
I would agree to you, Bash. Yes, it is always better to have a blended tariff, so that the open signal should be given to the IPPs who would be interested to participate, that they are asked to bid for both the technologies under the blended tariff scheme, and also we can give an incentive uh, for the proportion of the energy storage.
So, okay. So,
Bilal, I would just like to add here that I do agree with both the gentlemen that there needs to be a blended tariff for hybrid installations, but that would be applicable in new greenfield installations. For brownfield installations, I feel that moving to a blended tariff would be a challenge.
can you elaborate a little bit what kind of challenges would it be there for?
Well, yeah, so for a brownfield installation, you're actually plugging in a new technology and a new project into an existing project, which has, as you're aware, that in Pakistan, we have project finance structures. So we already have an existing plant with a signed off tariff. So moving away from the existing tariff to a new blended tariff would be a challenge in a project finance environment. So definitely, yes, we can have we would have to move to separate tariffs in case of brownfield installations. But yes, I agree. In greenfield installations with project financing options available, it is better for everyone to go for blended tariffs.
Thank you. So the next question is basically quite broad, and it says that what challenges could be faced by the power users if hybridization is promoted in South Asia region? And I would like to add in to this a little that generally when we go for multiple RE technologies in a specific region, one of the technology or one of the resource may not be very excellent, so that will lead into suboptimal utilization of the resources. So does it have any cost implications if we promote individual technology-based power plants or the multiple technology-based power plants in a hybrid mode? So maybe someone would take a lead.
Yeah, if I would say, yeah, Bilal, actually, definitely there will be some financial implications with regard to it. Promoting both the technologies at particular locations where both resources are available seems ideal, as indicated in my presentation, that it improves it is a win-win situation for both, for the IPPs as well as for the government or the evacuator. For the IPPs, of course, it improves the land utilization, because the land is spliced and it's a huge acreage of land is required for wind and solar power plants. This is ideal utilization of the land, and from the point of view of the evacuator, it's ideal utilization of the grid interconnection facility that's been created. So this is the win-win situation for the both, and of course this can be beneficial, but at locations where both resources are available. There are certain areas where, of course, solar potential is very good, but there's no wind potential, adequate wind potential. At that location, of course, there's no point of designing hybrid power plants. It's only workable for solar power plants at those locations.
Indeed. So if there is no more to add, the next question is basically directed to Mr. Vibash, and although not very directly linked to our topic, but it's quite relevant, that how does the alignment of renewable penetration targets in the national policy with various state level policies is ensured in India? So Mr. Vibash, if you could help us answer this question.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't have a very clear answer to it. There's a target which central government has given, and there are targets which state government itself has, has come out. In fact, we have this federal structure where central government can only provide guidance. It is up to the state government to accept or reject or to modify. So this 175 gigawatt under different technologies has been allocated to the state governments to execute, but some of the state governments have got their own numbers, which sometimes matches, sometimes does not match. But overall, I mean, the benefits which are coming from the central government are flowing towards the state government, and the state governments are also building up those projects, to achieve that overall target. So this is a coordination thing between the central and the state, but I think I can see the intent from both the sides. Barring that there are challenges for the RE-rich states to maintain their grid and are not really being benefited by putting up a lot more renewable energies than their RPO requirements. But I think we would be able to achieve this number by the year 2022 if I look at the progress and I know the kind of allocation which has happened. Hope I was able to answer that question.
Yeah, perfectly, sir, perfectly. So there is probably one more question from Mr. Faizan Ali, which is sort of a technical side. How much power will be lost due to shadowing effect of wind turbines on the PV arrays? Or if you could give in terms of your opinion that how much relevant or how big is this issue of shadowing?
Yeah, if I would take the lead. Actually, when you cite the wind turbines, there's usually around there's a lot of space available between the two wind turbines, and you can easily avoid the shadow coming from the wind turbines while you are siting your solar PV power plants. So this is a question of how you design and how you avoid the shadow. If you are if you have missed this thing and you have filled all the land and you're just not taking into consideration the shadow impact, then of course there will be a huge impact. This can reduce the energy output to a percentage level of 2 to 3%, which basically accounts a lot in terms of tariffs.
Right, sir. Maybe Mr. Gargo has something to add to it, if he's still with us.
So I don't. Okay, Mr.
Please,
Gargo,
Mr.
sorry.
Gargo, you can continue.
And also the calculation which I have seen for the simulation which I have seen so far, so it does not have much impact of wind shadow on the solar modules. I actually, it is all how you design the design on the ground. So you can really minimize it to the extent of percentage which is just one digit. I mean 5%, 7% kind of.
Okay, that's great, sir. So with this, we are also finished with the questions. So probably it's time to conclude the sessions and the webinar. I am extremely thankful to all the panelists who have remained with us through the whole webinar, and we have very interesting questions, very interesting presentations. Thank you very much all, sir. I may like to conclude this webinar by saying thanks to all the participants as well. We had listened to some excellent presentations delivered by our distinguished presenters from member states and other regions around the globe. All the presentations actually will be available on SAARC Energy Center website shortly. So we recommend do visit our website and get all this material. We would also love to hear from participants of their suggestions and comments for further improvement in our webinars, and plus they can also suggest any topics of their interest on which they want us to arrange future webinars. We would be very glad to do that. With this, I would like to sign out now. Thank you very much for joining us today, and I look forward to a productive session in the future as well. Thank you very much all, sir.